Good evening, everyone. My name's Andy Dodd. I'm with the Farm Consultancy Group. I'm going to kick us off, but it's very much a two-pronged attack tonight, looking at the details of mirroring heifers. I thought the best way to start this was really to look at some background as to why this project really took place. We know within agriculture, we've got a huge amount of volatility in all markets, but no more so than in the beef and sheep sector. The graph on the screen at the moment shows the past 5 years worth of data on beef prices, and we know on farm from my own experience with clients that we've got a range of anywhere between £80 and £370 a head return on those animals going through. If we then look at the sheep market, it's certainly not dissimilar. Very similar data you'll see with both graphs. The blue line is showing this year's data, which has obviously been affected by COVID-19 and the effects that that's had across the industry. But we can certainly see from the sheep margin that this is ranged between £45 and £105 per head, again, based on clients' data. If we then put into the mix also the changes in single farm payment that we're going to see over the next 5 or 6 years, we're aware that we need to look at farm incomes and ensure that every farm is sustainable and has a long-term future.
Yeah, my name's David, farm in Llysdi Melisaf, which is about just under 100 acres, ranges from about 750 feet up to 1250 where this photo is shown. We've also got another farm in Llanuwchlyn, which is a bit more of a mountain than an upland. This block in the past we always held about 320 breeding ewes here. They come down from the mountain as full mouth ewes, and they are put on terminal sires. In the past we've been lambing them kind of late February, but we've knocked that on slightly to be more in harmony with the grass on the farm to reduce the costs. Started rotationally grazing in 2018. After being on a Farming Connect course, Mastergrass, I think it was called. And then, started from there really and saw the potential of the farm, and then really pushed the grass growth up on the area without any nitrogen really. So yeah, the production potential of rotational grazing, just to show you, set stock to, we used to grow around 6 tons of dry matter to the hectare. Utilization used to be slightly poorer because the stock had the right to roam, to graze where they wanted to really. So what they ate was about 4.2 tons. Now, if you tighten that up and move, or rotational grazing is when you move them, anything within a week. If you're over a week, you're technically set stocked. So if you do shift to 3 to 7 days, you'll grow about 8 tons. This is not influenced by more nitrogen at all. Utilization climbs. So we get about 50% increase on set stock levels. But where the pinnacle is for Llysdi Mills, the next one, where I try to do like 2 to 3 day shifts, where the annual yield now goes up to 10 tons, utilizing about 85%, and then we're about 100% more than the set stock levels. We're not on daily shifts, that's a dairy farm, and them guys know how to do it for years, and they know how to utilize grass heavily. So did some tests back in the autumn of 2018. We were still set stocked on some of the farm. This is one of the best growing fields on the farm now, but it's right at the bottom of the farm. It's a typical silage field really. As you can see, the crude protein's just under 19 and then me's 10.2. Now, on the next slide now, just to show you, this is a field at 1250 feet, and now it's just difference in management there is. So the way it's been grazed, now it's at 25% protein, 12.2. So that's the huge driver for being able to, drive stock on. If you're fattening any stock classes or these dairy heifers, they'll grow really well on that type of grass. So the core system is really based on managing grass. Yeah, okay, so over the years really we've subdivided the farm further. So it used to be like the 320 ewes used to be on the freevoid up the top. They used to be open ranch really, and they used to roam around as they liked. Now it's split up into 12 different sections on that same piece of land, so we're really driving the profit. At the moment there's 370 weaned lambs at about 34 kilos average, and they're being held on about 13.5 acres, and they're on about 18-day shifts. That's with no nitrogen whatsoever all season. But there is a lot of clover present, a lot of white clover. About 40% of the lay is white clover, so it's fixing a lot of nitrogen. Yep. 3 rules I stick to really. 1, grass grows grass, so you need the leaf area to be able to capture that sunlight. And I do carefully manage the grass in the autumn period into the winter, and don't hammer the grass over winter. So I tend not to regraze a paddock from mid-October onwards. I have a wedge in front of them that'll last up until early December. They're then transferred onto silage bales. These are the ewes, obviously, and then the twins will be back out on a pre-lambing rotation about 21 days prior to lambing. So yeah, mid-Feb they were back on the grass this spring, and they were eating that high quality stuff, which saved on concentrates drastically. So grazing on time, yeah, rule 1 to 7 days. I tried to hit 3 days on this farm, and then on the mountain farm it's more like five days on average, because it's a bit further afield. We can't get there as often really. And yeah, the third rule really is the rest period is really important. So at peak growth, you'll be about 16 days with ewes and lambs, and you'll need upwards up to 120 days rest period over the winter, and that's fundamental. So the system really, yeah. So there's a saying: grow in 3 weeks and graze in 3 days. I think that reads quite well. Yeah. So use farm software. I measure the grass with a plate meter on a fortnightly basis. This is on the home farm and the mountain farm now, and it gives you, this is the wedge of llystimel. When did I measure last Friday? And that's really the pinnacle of managing the system. It's about €100 a year for this subscription. It's AgriNet. Yeah, so anybody who's looking to go into rotational grazing, that is fundamental to getting the most out of your system really. And then on the back of that I use FarmMax, which is software from New Zealand, which kind of projects where you're going to be down 3-4 months down the line, or you can look at different scenarios on the farm. If you want to get rid of all the sheep, we want to look at how many dairy heifers I can stock on the farm, collecting the suitable silage that they require. That's the kind type of scenario FarmMax will give you. Yep.
So just moving on, the decision was made to look at heifer rearing, and that was obviously part of this project, but as a wider initiative I was involved with AHDB around the calf to calving program. So we've kind of talked about cost basis very simply to start with. We know across the UK, on average, it's costing about £1,800 to rear the average dairy heifer. That's including infrastructure investment, capital cost, and also wages and cost of labour. We then know that within that, there's a huge range. The most efficient farms will be rearing those heifers at around about £1,000, and the least efficient will be up to £3,000. So it's not just a case of moving into heifer rearing and the grass is gold and you're going to be making loads of money. You've got to go about this in a way that's going to be efficient and make sure it fits your business. The other key thing that we also know is that for every day that animal is over 24 months before she calves, it's costing you an extra £2.87. So the older the animals get before they calve down, the more expensive it becomes. So again, efficiency is key, but also growing those heifers sufficiently. So the ideal target is really to calve those heifers in around 22 to 24 months, depends on the system that you're going to try to fit into. So from a practical point of view, looking at what can be achieved, location's obviously key. You've got to look at what markets you've got available, whether that is local marts or whether that's looking at local farms or local producers that you can sell into. I think it's also worth looking, is there a contract rearing opportunity there? A lot of dairy farmers across the UK, we know, are expanding. They tend not to be putting the initial investment into young stock housing, or they're trying to maximise a grazing platform. So there may well be opportunities there to rear a local farm's heifers and put them through your own system. And then it's really looking at what systems and breeds people are looking for in the area. So it's making sure the animal, if you go into heifer rearing, you're breeding an animal that fits what local farmers want. If there's demand for spring block calving systems where they're looking for more low input, small Kiwi type animal, then you're looking at the crossbreeding route. Whereas if you've got more intensive house systems, then it may well be the Holstein cow that fits that system. But really it comes back to where those heifers are coming from and what they're capable of in the future.
Yep, brilliant. So on the back of growing more grass, yeah, I had a bit of an issue. There was too much grass on the farm. So to you know, the main outlet of this dairy heifer enterprise really was to increase the amount of kilos I was carrying per hectare and increase the gross margin per hectare off the farm, and then doing it as cheaply as possible. You know, as Andy mentioned, the cost can vary drastically on a dairy system, you know, heifer rearing system, and basing it off a lot of grass was my way to avoid the heavy costs involved really. Yep. So yeah, from feed, so the calves arrived when they were roughly about 3 to 4 weeks old, all sourced off one farm. I think that's really important to have a good relationship with that farmer. I think that's key to the whole system being working well. When they got on the farm, they were having 3 litre feed morning and AM and PM. Creep was ad lib, so they could access it, and then as they're obviously growing, they're going to eat more and more creep. Once they're about 90 kilo, roughly about 8 to 9 weeks, that was the target weaning. Then I'd reduce their milk, so they'd only have morning or afternoon, depends if I want to lie in or I was happy to work later that week, and then half rate for a week. I just made sure they had 3 kilograms a head a day. Transition to grass really, doing it gradually, so they're still on the 3 kilogram per head per day initially of creep. I will drop creep gradually up till the end of August, so they're on, the ones that are outside now, they're on about 2 kilos a head a day, and I'll drop even more next month, eventually into 0 by end of August, as long as they're doing well. If they're growing, I think that's key to keep an eye on how they're performing, if they're on target. I offer straw to aid with transition to grass because they have access to that in the sheds as calves. Just helps transitioning. They'll be set stock for about a month, just in a paddock. I call it clean pastures, or something somewhere that cattle haven't been for at least a year. Where sheep have been, really, to reduce the worm burden. I will put polywire along the one side of the fence, just to train them with getting a shock before they go onto the paddock system. And to be honest with you, they're pretty good at staying in their place with just one polywire after, as long as they're trained correctly. Yep. Fodder beet was growing last year's bit of a trial to see if they could outwinter on it. It was a pretty dire winter, as we all know. Rainfall was drastic from about early November through, but yielded 27 tons dry matter a hectare, which I was quite happy with. You'll need to budget about £1,000 a hectare to grow it, so it's quite an expensive crop to grow. That does include the rental value of the land. Yeah, so you got to give it all, really. You can't just scratch it in and just hope it grows. It's like looking after a little baby in the beginning. Transition, you have to be very, very careful with the crop because it can kill cattle, quite quickly. So transition is over 21 days, and that's off grass. Once they're transitioned correctly, I will, close them onto this crop, and they've got access to bales. So the bales were positioned just using a small calculation. I think they were hitting a bale every 11 days, a new bale. So bale's just there as a supplement, really. And I think an important factor is always have a plan B if weather gets extreme. I think that happened, really. They they were brought in mid-December because they weren't performing as well that month. The weight gain was down, so I brought them in, and they were housed for 90 days until they were back out on, I think, roughly the 10th of March, back onto the fodder beet, dash grass, run back. So yeah, it was just a little experiment to reduce the winter costs, really. And yeah, that's the field there. So I have grown fodder beet again this year. I've done the field to the left where just above those ewes are, but this year I've done it slightly different. So I've just planted half the field. So I've put 1 hectare into fodder beet, and then the half is just grass. That'll just help with transition issues, and hopefully they'll have slightly better place to lie on. Yep. So yeah, I think that was roughly around the January period, where they'd eaten practically into that crop from the top side, and then I had a group of ewe lambs on the bottom working upwards. Yep. So yeah, that's them out roughly about end of November-ish, I would say. So yeah, conditions did get a bit muddy, so you have to kind of choose your location carefully. And with fodder beet, if you're on a bit of a hill there, graze the crop going downwards, so you can catch any runoff. And then the field to the right was the field they had running back into, and that picture was taken mid-February. So average farm cover was 2,000 in February, and they were one of the strongest fields. So yep. Yeah, that's the picture of them just finishing off the fodder beets. That would have been late March. Yeah, they did very well on it. And one thing to note is I do weigh these cattle every month. I think it's really important to keep an eye on how they're getting on, which Andy will go over in a minute, and adjust your feeding regime if there's any issues. I think that's vitally important. Yep. I do use, the ewes are there as a tool as well. We're still mainly a sheep farm, so the sheep will graze the platform in the same manner as the cattle will. I think they both work in harmony, and grazing the residuals down to covers of 3 to 4 centimeters during the last round of sheep will give you really good quality going into the spring. I think yep. So this is a sample I sent off, 18th of Feb. Did a couple of fields up on the top there where the ewes were in that last photo, and then you can see the protein there is sky high. I had a bit of a shock to see that as high as it was, and the ME was 12.5. So yeah, if you're getting that quality in the spring, animals don't really require much else. Yeah. So the cost system, I keep an eye on. Yeah, go on. I think there's a couple of slides. Oh, it's missing off yours. So sorry, I've just edited that one. Gross margin currently stands about 1,100 a head. That's taking away the sale value and all the costs. My time, I was speaking with Andy about it. It's hard to track the time. During the grazing season, it's relatively low labour requirement, but during this AI period where I'm keeping an eye on the natural heats, I'm putting a bit more time into this period now. So yeah, I based it on £350 a head. Biggest cost really is silage and concentrates. They don't have a massive amount of concentrates. They're eating about 460 kilos of cake from when they arrive to their planned sale. If you can keep the silage and concentrates costs down, that's to do with the grazing system here really. If I didn't have that grazing system here, I'd have to feed more silage. They'd be in more of a winter, and I'd have to probably bump up the concentrates usage to find the gains that I'm requiring really. Yep. Okay, so I've this has been a bit of a new thing for me. I've not done much with AI since I was in college many moons ago. So yeah, it's been quite a learning curve for me. I've got a local guy that comes to AI him for me. I've been using these LIC heat patches, which I thought worked really well, but I've found it a bit harder to spot the repeaters. Bull, yeah, I think in the future I will be, looking at probably bringing the bull on after the, everything's been served once, just to simplify the system, just to make it a bit easier to work with. So I'm using Sexcel, so hopefully those heifers that have, got, I'll keep their calves basically in the next batch. So numbers will increase to 40 plus eventually. I'd like to keep a bit more of them really, because a group of 20 is a little bit, a group of, excuse my French, is a bit of a pain in the ass to look after in terms of rotationally grazing. I think the bigger the groups, the easier it is on the whole. Yep.
Okay, so just looking at what needs to be considered if people are looking at doing this, the first thing and probably the most important thing is really where you're going to source those heifers from. It's definitely a lot easier, it's a lot simpler, and probably a lot safer if you can source them from one place, especially if you know where they're coming from, which kind of links onto the next point. With any animal, but certainly with dairy heifers, the key point is the colostrum management. You need to make sure that those animals you're buying have had optimum colostrum management. They've had 3 litres of colostrum within the first couple of hours of life, and they've had a further 3 litres within 12 hours, and again within 24. This probably in any dairy system is one of the weak points in any system, and it can affect pneumonia, growth rates, and everything going forward. It has such a huge impact on that animal. It's something that is fairly straightforward to get right, but if you source animals or buy heifers that haven't had that management right, you will be the one that pays the cost of ill health and probably significant loss of his animals as well. Just looking at health history as well, biosecurity and everything kind of rolled into that. You need to make sure those animals you're buying on are healthy, the herd they're coming from are healthy, but it's also being aware a little bit like Ddefaid said before about grass. It's knowing what minerals you need to feed those animals. What are those animals going to come across? What challenges are they going to come across on your farm? When you're looking at outwintering in particular, we know that iodine deficiency can be quite common in dairy heifers, and again it causes quite a lot of stillbirth in those animals. So it's making sure you monitor what you're feeding them and actually make sure you're providing a supplement that will counter any issues or challenges they might come across. Going back really to the point as to where these heifers are going to go, who are you going to move them on to? The best thing you can buy is looking at genetic potential. Genetic potential will affect the sale of that animal, but it'll also look at the health of that animal as it goes through the time on your farm as well. So really paying attention to that genetic potential is crucial. Looking at your infrastructure, you've seen there when we're looking at paddock grazing and everything else, it's knowing what you've got on farm. It's making sure you have got buildings that are suitable, sufficient ventilation, which we'll come on to in a bit when we're talking about that. But it's just making sure you've got tracks or infrastructure that will cope with heifers. They're very different animals, obviously, to sheep in particular, and they will find a way out if there's a way through. They'd make a bigger hole than a sheep. That's probably the biggest challenge. Slurry and farmyard manure. Now, this might seem like a bit of a strange one, but if you're looking to put your heifers onto cubicles, you need to make sure you've got a way of handling that slurry for MVZ regulations and environmental implications. You just need to make sure you've got something in place or a plan in place to deal with that. Again, we'll probably touch on that shortly. And then when it comes to actually what are you going to do with them, how are you going to sell those down? Do you sell them as down calving heifers where the farm will probably pay slightly less that they're going to, but you don't have the calf? Or is this something you're looking to do as a longer term? So actually you look to calve the heifer down on farm, retain any dairy heifers, which then gives you the next cycle coming through, and sell them as down calved heifers. Obviously, there's an implication of that you're going to have to milk them in the short term before they go off farm, but that can be done with a small single unit milking machine, which is going to cost you £600, £700, £800 depending on the model you buy. So it's not a huge expense, but it's certainly something to consider. But probably out of all of this that's already been mentioned is actually that measuring. You need to make sure that to do this efficiently, you're measuring those animals. You've got growth rates in place. We'll look at those in a second, but you do need that electronic weigh kit really to do this properly. We know that animals vary within a group, which is all important to pick up. But as you'll see in a second, you can get huge variation depending on the time of year and the weather. It's not only the animal you need to measure as well, but it's also measuring that grass and making sure you're not putting something in front of them that they're not going to utilize properly. So the whole system revolves around measuring and managing on a weekly or even daily basis to make sure you're getting the best out of the animals. So if we then come on to look at live weight gain of the heifers that Daffod's had to come through, as you can see on there, that we have got a reasonable variation. They do drop down below 0.4 of a kilo, which is during that whole wet period before they came in. But we've also got periods where they're well above a kilo in growth. We're really looking for consistency, and consistency is really key all the way through this. I mentioned before about them needing to calve down by 22 to 24 months. The biggest thing that's going to affect that is their growth, and you need to have these animals 60% of their mature weight at service. So it's making sure you get that efficient growth. Obviously, the younger the animal, the more efficient they'll grow. So their time on milk powder or milk replacer is really crucial. And then the weaning period is also critical to make sure you don't get a check and a loss in growth. So with the heifers we've got here, we're looking for an average daily gain of an average Holstein animal of between 0.75 and 0.8, and this group of animals actually average 0.79 right across the period, so they're pretty much spot on where they need to be for the period they've been on farm so far. I've just put this one in for reference really. This is taken from a calf to calving farm that turned their heifers out to grass. They probably had the most consistent growth through the period. This is all the calf to calving farms that were on the units, and as you can see, we're looking for an average growth of 0.75 to 0.8, which is the red line. Anything to the right of the red line is above that growth rate, but the bigger concern is every animal to the left of that red line is actually below, and we've got some animals within the calf to calving program, 15, that actually were barely growing at all between the period of 12 and 15 months. So the only way we knew this was by weighing them. If you actually looked at them visually, there didn't look anything wrong because the whole group were in a very similar position. So unless you've got a lot of inconsistency within the group, it's quite often easy to miss any significant changes in growth on those farms. So I thought probably the best way, or David and I both thought that probably the best way to wrap this up was really to go through what he's enjoyed about it, what he's found easy, what's worked, what's not worked. So if we kick off with a fairly straightforward one, what's worked well?
Working with Simon and Andy. I think that's what I call. I think they're relatively easy to manage, with the grass. I do enjoy, when they're out grazing. I think that works well. Simple system. Yeah, and it saves a lot of labour. I think, I do like the grazing system.
What do you think sorry, go on.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest challenges have been?
This AIing, I think, has been a challenge. Spotting the second repeats has been a bit of a challenge. I've had next door's ball a bit of an issue with breaking through and serve two of them. So that's just put a bit of a headache on the whole thing. That's probably the hardest thing. And then fodder beet over the winter period. But as long as you got a plan B, as I said, that's okay. Yeah, if I didn't have that plan B, I think I'd be, worried really.
So what have you learned?
Everything to do with dairy heifers, really. I've just taken it on, really. I've taken a lot of advice on over the time, and I've really enjoyed it. Really, it's been an interesting learning curve with them, and I'm a bit more eased with this group that's come here this spring, definitely, because I kind of know what I'm doing, or hopefully I know what I'm doing.
With your infrastructure and buildings, what do you think's worked well, and where do you think the changes would benefit?
I've a bit short on water in some of the fields up the top, so I've been having to carry water to some groups of stock. So that's not fun for a group of heifers because they drink about 1,000 litres. That group of 19 of them drink about 1,000 litres over 2 days. So yeah, I'm a bit limited in terms of where I can put them at the moment. But I've just bought a solar pump now and invested in some additional pipe work so every paddock will have access to water. So yeah, that's infrastructure that will be really, really useful once it's in place. In terms of buildings, I've not got any cubicles fitted yet, even though I have bought some. And probably ventilation is something that's different from sheep being in a shed. Cattle require a bit better ventilation, which I need to address on one shed really.
Yeah, good. You've kind of answered this one, but are you going to do it again?
Yeah.
So what will you do differently with this group?
Differently. I think I'll, if the weather does change in that November period, I'll probably house them a bit sooner. Probably, I'll still potentially turn them out as soon as I can, as soon as the conditions arise. I'll turn them out the same. Probably house them as weather deteriorates. Really, I'll change that system. I'll have a think about my AI and schedule. I'll may look into synchronizing them just to ease the operation and then having a sweeper bull after. But in terms of everything else, no, I'm relatively happy so far. But there's obviously another a few months left with them, and I maybe have a different opinion.
So if you could give everybody one piece of advice, or anybody who's looking at this one piece of advice, what would it be?
With the dairy and heifers, yeah, source them. You got to have a good source. I think as you've mentioned, you've got to have a farm that's keen on the colostrum, high health status. You've got to get on with that farmer. I think that's key really. And then for me, it was looking at the grass or the management of grass to make the most out of that pretty cheap resource we've got as farmers in Wales.
Good. I think that's it from us, Simon. It's over to you.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David and Andy. Very informative, comprehensive and interesting presentation. And some great pictures as well to add to it. So thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed listening to you, and I hope our participants have done the same. We're now ready to go to the questions and open the floor up, as it were. Just to remind everyone that you can still type in questions in the box on your screen by clicking the Q&A icon. So please, ask as many questions as you wish. So I will now hand over to Rhys, who's going to just direct the questions to either David or Andy. Thank you, Rhys.
Okay, there's more of a comment than a question by one of the attendees. At £2.87 a day, that's unsustainable. That was the comment. I think you mentioned, Andy, that was for every day over the heifer was at the farm for over 24 months. So maybe just clear or elaborate on that point.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It is unsustainable. The issue we've got across the UK is the average age at first calving for a dairy heifer is just under 28 months. So we know that average of £1,800 that I mentioned at the start, a large amount of that is actually due to the age at first calving. So the guys that are achieving heifer rearing at £1,000 will be the ones that are hitting 22 to 24 months. The point to make is you need to hit that target by measuring and managing. If you miss those targets and you end up with calving heifers at 26, 28 months, you're going to be no better off than you would be with beef and sheep, and probably a lot more stress in the meantime. So don't be deluded as to how expensive this can get if things do run over time.
Okay, and then a follow-up question, I'm guessing to that one, from the same attendee. Could you give us a breakdown of the gross margin for this enterprise you mentioned, which you said is just over £1,100?
Yeah, I haven't got it off the top of my head, but yes. So the farm with £1,000 is a spring calving unit. They would be a very similar system to what DAF is running there. They would be on a good quality milk powder, high fat and protein, low ash, so they would get good growth rates to start with. They would transition them onto grass, or be out at grass within 4 or 5 weeks of birth, obviously weather allowing and everything else. And they would regularly manage and weigh those heifers as they go through. Obviously limited infrastructure costs with those sorts of systems. There's less investment in that respect. They do some of them would tend to run a slightly higher replacement rate as well. So you tend to find that those farms will drop animals out if they're not meeting the grade on weights. They'll drop them out at an earlier stage just to make sure they've got a uniform batch of heifers coming through. I don't have the figures to hand on the computer at the minute, but I can certainly put them up if people are interested.
Okay, thank you, Andy. And then this is a question for David. Did you not consider contract rearing, David?
Yeah, I have, thought about it. I still a sheep farmer. The farm up on the mountain will always be a sheep farm. I think always will have sheep dotting around the place. Yeah, there's things coming up in the near future about that. But yeah, that's definitely things to consider. Why not? It's a great way of changing your system or introducing another enterprise. Yeah, definitely is. Yeah, I would. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, and then again to you, David. You didn't sound too convinced with fodder beet. Are you considering other options?
Not at the moment. It's the fodder beet probably had its worst type of weather that you could actually graze on last winter, and I think it was. It deserves another try at it, because I don't think we'll have as much rain. Well, hopefully not as that again. So I'm going to give it one more go, and then look at other options. Potentially kale is another one. Bale grazing is another one I could do. Yeah, I'm going to give it a go for one more time. I think it's worth the one more go. It yields quite well. It is a really bumper crop. It holds a lot of animals on a small space. So yeah, give it one more go. You can ask me again in a year.
Okay. And there's a question here. Do you really need 3 kilos of concentrates with your grass being such good quality?
In the beginning, yes, I think you do, because there won't be transition to eat. The stomachs, the ruminants won't be developed until they're about 5 months old. So I think it's really important to keep them motoring until they can handle that quality grass. Yeah, I don't know if Andy agrees with me.
Totally agree. Yeah, completely agree. They're 5 months before they really start utilising the grass properly. So, and like you say, you can't afford for them to stop growing. They're still within a really efficient growth period, so you keep them moving and absolutely.
Yeah.
But again, that comes back to the measuring and managing. If you're weighing the heifers and they're growing really well and above target, you can start to reduce that concentrate level. But it's all about weighing and knowing where they're at growth wise.
Yeah.
Okay, and then a question for Andy. Going back to your calving down at 24 months, why is it that older heifers tend to sell better in markets?
It's down to the buyers. It tends to be down to the buyers. Everybody's looking for a good, strong heifer. It's never about. I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one, isn't it? Everybody goes to the market looking for a good, strong heifer. When you actually look at all the data, anything that calves, certainly over 26 months, tends not to be on farm anywhere near as long as those animals that calve 22 to 24 months. You will have more calving issues. They do present a bigger challenge, fertility-wise and everything else. I think that's where your market comes in and making sure you're selling them into the right place. You are still better off, and the farmer will be better off if you rear heifers and sell him heifers that are going to calve by 22, 24 months.
Okay, and question here, resting land over winter is important. How do we achieve that? And if sending sheep away, how do you work out the cost and potential saving on grass quality?
Yeah, it's all to do with winter feed budgeting. You got to realise you know, I tend to build my average farm cover to about covers of 2-4 on average, you know, into the autumn period. So I've got a good wedge of grass going forward into the winter, not carrying too many lambs. So hopefully the lambs are growing well over the, you know, the summer, and the majority of them have gone. I think carrying a lot of too much stock over winter, it's damaging for your spring. It's doable. You know, I grow root crops as well, Swedes for the sheep, so I don't outwinter anything. I also got sheds where they can come in on, you know, high quality forage really. I'd rather feed them, you know, silage earlier in December to preserve that high quality grass for when they really need it, pre-pregnancy and lactation. Yeah, in terms of working out the cost, you know, I've saved about £13 a ewe this winter on reduced feed, really, on concentrates. We used to buy in quite a lot of hay every year and reduce block usage. So yeah, you've got to look at what your costs are. Your concentrates are sky high. You know, if you can reduce that, see what you're spending on. There's no 5-minute answer there really. It's quite a big question to answer. If you can find somewhere to out with winter, you've got to consider the cost factor of that, and obviously carrying them sheep away as well. You know, at the moment the system works for me here, and I won't change it. The sheds are there. The only you know issue I've got with sheds is if I'm going to keep more cattle, I'll obviously have a bit less space for them sheep in over winter. So I'll have to look at other options. That may include growing more Swedes, bale grazing, for example. So yeah, there's a set rule you need to stick to really. You got to rest that ground over the winter period if you want to get the most out of it in the spring. You know, I could spend an hour or two talking to you about that.
Okay. And then there's a question here. Are you not worried about going down with TB before selling heifers?
Yeah, I'm in a low area anyway. I think if I was a high risk area, I think this enterprise would be a bit tough to go into really. Andy, have you got any experiences of dealing with, you know, TB?
Yeah, I think
heifers?
It is a massive issue. I think if you are in a high risk area, this is where you're looking at probably heifer rearing contract instead of buying in and trying to sell out. At least then you can get a link license. If you're in 10 miles as the crow flies at the moment under current regulations, you get a link license with the farm that owns the heifers, and you'll be able to move them to and forth. There's obviously added cost of TB testing and the labour requirement, but that's usually negotiable when you're looking at putting a rental agreement in place or a contract rearing agreement in place. So there are options, but I absolutely agree. If you're looking to buy and sell, then it does present a massive challenge, and it's high risk.
Yeah, and those are all the questions.
Before we leave tonight, I want to just thank everyone for listening in and participating and asking some really good questions in tonight's webinar. And again, I'd like to thank David, Andy, and my colleague Rhys, tonight's administrator. And finally, and above all, please stay safe. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.